to today's show on Purely OCD. We are going to be talking about contamination OCD this week. We are following off the heels of health anxiety, and we thought that this could potentially be a good segue into some good contamination. Good
Definitely.
old contamination.
Good old-fashioned contamination OCD, a classic.
And we reference it a lot. So even talking to you, I was like, did we just do this one?
Yeah.
Um,
Didn't we just finish? Yeah, no.
because it's
true.
constantly talked about, because we refer to contamination around a lot of things, not just germs per se, right? Like, and next podcast we'll probably be talking about emotional contamination. There can be contamination around really anything in OCD. So
Yeah,
yeah.
that is. Yeah, in fact, I was kind of reflecting on that this morning when we kind of, made the decision to talk about this. And I think that in some ways all of OCD, right, can be boiled down. Well, not all. That's probably a little bit reductive, but a lot of OCD can be boiled down to contamination. Like, I don't want my life to be contaminated by this uncertainty, these thoughts, right? Like, and by contamination, I don't mean physically contaminated. I just mean that sort of emotional experience, which, to your point, we're going to be talking about.
Yeah, even like obsessing on obsessing, right? Like obsessing, I have OCD, is like this contamination of life that I have intrusive thoughts and anxiety.
Yep.
So,
Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly.
So,
So, want to start us off in terms of what obsessions look like with
yeah.
straight up contamination?
So contamination straight up would be germs in my mind. Yeah. If we're talking about it like that, it could be it's hard because it's like, well, could blood be involved in that? Right? Like
Yeah.
phobias of blood. Like usually it's like fluid, like bodily fluids, poop, pee, vomit, blood, any of that.
All that good stuff.
All that good stuff, which can go back to what if I contract some type of disease, or if I get sick because I touched a doorknob that potentially has the flu on it. And OCD isn't, we can't just say, oh, here's OCD, it's in this pocket, because it's so much broader than that. Because a lot of people, it can be, oh, well, what if I get sick and then I give it to my family? And then what if I accidentally hurt them in some way? And now I'm responsible. So it's like, okay, it's hyper responsibility, it's harm OCD, it's contamination OCD, it's a little bit of health anxiety. So taste the rainbow, folks.
Yes, so much overlap. And
Just
also
broadly talking about it.
yes, yeah. I think also with contamination, I often will think of chemicals, right? Which, like, not just the bodily stuff, secretions
Or germs.
or germs. That's true. Germs aren't bodily secretions, are
Yeah.
they? That it's, sometimes the things that we are used to, address germs or a lack of cleanliness in an area can be a source of fear for people with contamination OCD. And likewise, what you were saying about sort of the by proxy nature of it, this fear of like harming others, we see this also in relation to, I think I've seen a fair amount of this, and I don't know if this is just because I have a small sample size, but with postpartum.
Yeah.
And perinatal. Have you?
Yeah, I have. Yeah. And I think too, again, it's like going back to like what's real and what's OCD, because I think a certain degree you do have to be protective of a brand new child or in pregnancy.
Totally.
So it's, again, to reiterate to our viewers or listeners, is that it's an excessive amount that's interrupting your life.
Yes, exactly. And that excessive piece is the most important element. Totally.
Right.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I guess I'd like to know more about what you're thinking can be excessive.
Well, so just not being willing to use any sort of household cleaner like when you have a baby, for instance,
Right.
or needing to
Which
wash hands excessively. Yeah, which you could see how that could become quite limiting. Um,
Well, right, and then it goes back to, like, this OCD feeding on itself. It's like, well, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's like, well, we're not gonna clean because we don't wanna contaminate child with chemicals. However, what we've now done is created a lot of bacteria and viruses and potentially way more dangerous things.
yes, and the reverse could also be true.
Exactly.
Ah,
Yeah,
brain.
it's really
OCD,
fun. Good
man.
times.
Good times. Um, and we have done an episode too on disgust,
Mhm.
which I think is important to just nod to here, is that sometimes people aren't afraid of coming into contact with these things because they're harmful or because they might, cause harm to others or themselves, but mainly because of that ick factor that arises. So if that's you, like I said, we did a whole episode on OCD and disgust, which, some of the things that we're going to say here are probably going to resonate with you, but there are also some things that you might find or you connect with more over there.
Yeah, it's such a good point. A nuance again in treatment is that if we do this downward arrow questioning of, hey, then what would happen? Like if you touch that doorknob, then what's the fear? Like, then what? Then what? And some people might say, nothing. I just don't like the feeling.
Yeah. Yep.
um, the difference is like the treatment's going to be the same. The difference really is that the exposures may be, skewed in a way that's different.
Definitely. And I guess what's interesting as we talk about this is that we're hitting on a number of different emotional experiences that come with various forms of OCD, but
Mhm,
specifically within contamination, right? So far, we've talked about anxiety,
mhm.
about something bad happening. We've talked about guilt. We didn't name it, but we've talked about guilt in terms of like, oh my gosh, what if something bad happens to my loved one?
I
Um,
said hyper responsibility. Yeah.
totally. I'm just
Yep.
saying that, like, I'm
The feelings.
not
Okay.
saying that
Gotcha.
you didn't say
Yeah, yeah.
something, but the idea of like the emotional experience, like guilt or disgust, right? That all of these things are um, essentially going to be treated the same way. It doesn't matter what the feeling is that you're unwilling to have, it's that you are unwilling to have the feeling.
It's true.
So,
And that we have to keep doing that thing anyways in spite of the feeling
yes. Yeah. So,
on repeat.
right. In the context of contamination OCD, that might look like touching things that cause you anxiety or guilt or disgust and refraining
Mhm.
from washing, for instance. But I digress because that's a couple episodes down the line.
Yeah. Well, but it's important.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, why don't you, if you want to give us like a few examples or an example that you commonly see?
Yeah. So I think one of the most commonly depicted ones is related to fear of contracting HIV, or has historically been the fear of contracting HIV/AIDS.
Mhm.
Um, and so when somebody has an obsession, like, what if this thing, whatever the thing in your environment is contaminated, or what if this person is contaminated, right? And I come into contact with them, even in ways that we rationally understand are not going to lead to the contraction of HIV/AIDS. Um, that's a common obsession that arises, and there's a lot of avoidance that we see with this particular subtype.
Mhm.
Um, and that doesn't just mean avoiding surfaces. It could be avoiding places when you're not sure whether or not um, there might be a needle hidden in the grass of a park, or I'm not going to go to the hospital even though I need to because I might somehow, step on something or
Yep.
need a blood transfusion that would, you know, lead to me having
Mhm.
HIV.
Lots of checking can go on there as well.
Yes.
Checking for symptoms, getting tested excessively because you
Yeah.
there is that could be dormant in your system for a while, which triggers a lot of people.
Yeah, it's tough when we talk about other obsessions. It's oftentimes very, very clear that there is no definitive answer. But I see people with this manifestation arguing for it. But well, there is an answer though. So I could and and pointing out, well, actually, even though there is an answer, you're
Yeah.
still going to question whether or not that's a definitive answer, and whether or not
Oh,
uh,
yeah.
you might not test positive yet because the viral load was too low. So,
Right. Right. Exactly. Exactly.
yeah.
Another thing with contamination, I was just thinking as you're saying that is I've seen it manifest in so many ways, as I'm sure you have, but another one that's like more obscure could be, um, oh shoot, I lost it. Well, I remember one of them. I had two.
Okay.
One of them would be like, what if somebody has a food allergy and I've contaminated, or I have a food allergy and I've contaminated somehow with this food?
Yep. That's a really good one, especially because it links in again with the connections to emetophobia. Not necessarily the allergen, but the idea that I'm going to somehow ingest something that's going to make me throw up, like it's contaminated somehow. Like it,
Right.
I guess it's not the same, but it reminds me of that.
Yeah, yeah, totally.
Yeah.
It's like it's all, yeah.
Yep.
Um, I wish I could. Oh, it could be like asbestos or lead,
Good one. Yes. Yep. Definitely seen
paint
those.
chip, like lead in paint too.
Yep.
Um, it's endless. It's really endless.
Yeah, pretty much anything that could cause you harm or that is gross or that could, cause somebody else harm. It like
Yeah,
doesn't matter what it is.
yeah.
Um,
Environmental toxins, all of it.
yep.
It's a good time. Literally anything you could possibly think of.
Is it? Is
Yeah,
it?
it's definitely not. It's
No,
brutal.
it is brutal.
Yeah.
It is brutal. And of are there any other subtypes that I mean, I guess we would be omitting a very important one if we skated past COVID, because obviously that has been a huge trigger for people with contamination obsessions.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Yes, absolutely. Um, yeah.
yeah.
Thinking of something that was a private experience. So
For those who are new to the show, private experiences are acceptance and commitment therapy lingo for the thoughts and feelings and urges, sensations that happen within us. And Kelley just beautifully demonstrated what you do with them, which is essentially notice them and then keep on going.
going. Yeah.
Going.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good job with the private experiences, man.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad I could model good behavior.
You crushed it, man. Um, yeah, I think a lot. I haven't seen it as much lately, which I suppose,
Yeah, it's few and
yeah,
far between
yeah. And
now, thank goodness. But it's definitely there still.
it is definitely there still. It's
Yeah.
in some ways it's interesting too, because I think HIV/AIDS has probably become less of a concern as well, not because it's not still, an issue or a problem, but because there are effective ways of managing it now, whereas there weren't, even 20 years ago, really, like
Right.
accessible,
When it
easily
was an
accessible.
epidemic, yeah.
Yeah. Yep. So we kind of see trends in terms of,
What's
what's
in the news, you know?
right. Absolutely. And there's some interesting, I can't remember exactly who talks about this, but interesting ideas around issues from like a public, like the view of public opinion. So
Yeah.
like that are biased, right? Based on prejudices that exist.
Yeah, and I know what you're talking about because 'cause I've read it and heard
Yeah,
it from an OCD, perspective, and I was like, "Oh, I know exactly what she's talking about, but I can't place
I
who
know.
said it."
But talking about how HIV/AIDS was such a central theme
Uh-huh.
because not just because it was a danger, but because there was all of this rhetoric around its connection with the LGBTQ community and people's concerns about being, and this is awful, but like the anxiety that existed at that time in the ethos, I don't think that's the word, in the atmosphere around identifying with that community, so that like there are some maybe prejudices inherent to what obsessions arise. Not to make people feel badly about that, but interesting to watch the cultural.
Right. It's like shame almost.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And, we know that shame is a big part of this disorder and how it preys on people.
Boy, yeah, it's a strong component, unfortunately.
Yeah, a quick side note, by the way, this morning I was watching a clip from Pure, which is the show that Rose Cartwright, based on her book, I believe, right?
I
Right?
think so.
Fantastic show. If you've ever struggled with intrusive images related to sexual content, and it's very, very normalizing. She does a great job. It's portrayed really excellently. And why was I bringing that up? That's a great question, Lauren. I don't entirely remember.
I don't know. We were talking about just shame.
That's why, because I think because of the fact that the character that in the show is so ashamed of the thoughts, the images that are coming into her mind, that she presumes it must mean something really horrible about her. And thus the cycle begins, right? Like, I want to resist them. I want to get rid of them. They're bad. They mean something about me.
Yeah.
So, it's a big problem with it.
Definitely.
Disorder.
How do people access that show? Because I think it's on HBO or something, right?
Great question. I think it might have been on HBO. Let me do a quick Google search.
Okay.
I think it might even be available on YouTube. Where to watch Pure. Rose Cartwright. So anyway, I will look that up.
Yeah. So going back to contamination stuff is, I think it's just explaining more about how that presents. So yes, we talked about avoidance, but also this can be excessive hand washing.
I'm doing a little trying to find the link. Sorry. Go ahead. Excessive hand washing.
Excessive hand washing. It could be excessive any washing, showering. It could be washing your clothes excessively. It could be asking for lots of reassurance, like, hey, are you feeling sick? Do you think that I'm presenting in a way? Like, what do you think about this symptom that I'm having? This,
Right. Yes. Lots of ways, including very sneaky ways of trying to get some relief in the face of the feelings that come up because of all of the obsessions.
Yeah. So like you were saying earlier, like avoiding the use of any chemicals at all, or what you often see, I think a lot with the postpartum, is that when that comes up, it's getting it's the compulsing. So getting partner to come in and do the compulsions for you, because that I'll avoid all of that, or just have them do the thing so we can avoid all anxiety.
Yes. But also, and not to go too deep into the world of compulsions, because I know that we're going to devote the next episode to this, but I think it's really interesting that and that can cause relational strife, right? Is that if you are passing that off to your partner, you might also have really stringent rules for your partner doing it. And if you see that they're not doing it perfectly or doing it right, then you might end up, getting upset with your partner. It's tough.
It is tough.
Yeah.
I feel like you see it a lot with contamination.
Yeah.
Because they can it's a little more easier to delegate compulsions with. But
yes. Yeah. That and checking, I would say as well. Would you agree?
Yeah. Absolutely. I think anything around contamination.
Yes, I meant like sort of checking related to home safety and security, right? Like
Oh, okay.
locks and that kind of stuff as well. I
Right.
see that the contamination stuff and that tend to lend themselves more toward being accommodated by
Right.
outside forces.
Right. The hyper
Outside
response.
forces.
Star Wars.
Like, yeah, I mean,
Ah!
wow. Um, I just want to take a moment because somebody in the chat was saying I've been recently diagnosed with OCD, anxiety, and complex PTSD. My brain did a complete 180 on me. I never knew such fear could exist in my mind. Just acknowledging that I'm sorry that that's been your experience, and we've seen people there, and we've been there to all of a sudden be like, what in the world? Why is this so sticky, and why is this so intense? And just to know, hopefully, that you're not alone, and there's lots and lots of help and support available.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, how do we embrace exposure therapy with thoughts? It's a process that's not necessarily linear. So it's meaning when we have a client coming in, they're not going to just immediately start believing that this stuff works until time kind of goes on, and then there's more buy-in, and you have to trust the process a bit. And
Yeah, that's for
it's
sure.
yeah, and you're going to go in and out of like, am I willing to do this? Am I willing today? And
Yes. Am I willing in this very moment?
in this moment, tomorrow, it
How
might
about
change.
now?
Yeah, how about right now?
Well, that's a really good point, though, because I think people get stuck in how do I accept this forever? But you can't accept anything forever. It's like to your point, moment by moment. I just like what you said,
Yeah,
and I'm repeating
thanks.
it. So,
Thanks.
yeah.
Good.
Um,
Yeah, hang
actually,
in there, and you're not alone in all of it.
yeah, yeah. And maybe we can bring this next question back to the context of contamination OCD, right? Kelley mentioned earlier. So the question is, how do you know it's OCD?
Mm,
And earlier, Kelley mentioned, like, okay, one of the ways that we identify that OCD, that it's a disorder, right? That the thoughts and the response to the thoughts is a disorder, is that it's excessive, right? The response itself is excessive, and it starts to take over your life. In fact, in the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, which is the Bible of the therapists,
mhm.
we talk about it causing clinically significant distress or impairment in social, occupational, or other important areas of functioning. That's the criteria that exists throughout
Wow,
that book with
just
other.
memorize that, huh?
I have read that a
Diagnosis
lot.
code F41 point
F42.2,
yeah,
bam.
42.2.
So yeah, I think that is, if you're starting to experience issues in your life related to your thoughts and feelings, that's one way to tell. And I'm going to lob it over to Kelley for part 2 of the answer, because I
Mhm.
think I know what she's going to say.
Is we wanna meet with a therapist who specializes in OCD and get that confirmation. I don't know if that's what
Absolutely.
you were
Actually, it's
thinking.
not, but
Okay.
it's a really important point that I wasn't thinking about. So see,
Well,
um,
well,
no, it's hugely
yeah,
important. I think
ultimately, we don't know,
there
right?
you go. That was the
And
other thing I was going to say.
okay, there
But
you go.
the order of operations, you putting in the fact that you need to see a therapist first, is the correct order of operations. So I almost missed a step, is what I'm saying.
Well,
Um,
yeah, it's tough, and I think even in therapy, there comes a point where people go, "Well, how much of this is OCD and how much of it isn't?" And we have to go, "Well, it doesn't," we have to just say it doesn't matter and just run with it. Um, but but
but
going back to, like, really generalizing it, is that in contamination OCD, it's that, for example, everybody washes their hands. I would hope that,
fingers crossed.
fingers crossed, most people are washing their hands, like, after they use the restroom, maybe before they eat. And that's healthy behavior. Okay, that's what we want.
Yeah.
However, if somebody is spending rituals of like, I have to wash it 3 times and I have to pump and then pump the soap 3 times. And then if I don't do that in that right order, I have to do that. That's excessive amount. Or
Yes.
they're spending, 10 minutes in front of it. Anything longer than what the average person is doing is excessive.
Yes. And also want to point out that context is really important here, because I was just thinking as you were saying it, right, that like doing all of the rituals, like I'm going to clean under each and every one of my fingernails every single time, and I'm going
Right.
to pump the
Doctors
soap.
do that. Yeah.
That's what I was going to say, is that like if you're a surgeon, that's
Yeah.
actually not a
I
problem.
would hope
That's,
that they
but
do.
yeah, fingers crossed again. So it's right, like we wouldn't say that's causing impairment in occupational functioning. That's actually a necessity of the job. So um, while there are many routes to getting clarity around this, including considering whether your behaviors are excessive, consulting most importantly with a mental health professional, that ultimately there is this element of like, there's no way to be 100% sure, because, and this is one thing I just want to say, is like when it comes to obsessions, it's not as though, how do I know that this is an obsession, or how do I know that this is an intrusive thought, or how do I know this thought is OCD? It's like their thoughts aren't OCD. Thoughts are thoughts. Right? Like it's how we
Right.
respond to those thoughts that's either a reflection of obsessive compulsive disorder or not.
Right. Because
So
you can have lots of intrusive thoughts, but maybe you're responding really well to them, like myself and Lauren,
yeah.
most
Yeah.
of the time. Then
Yeah,
for
more
me
often than
personally, yeah.
yeah, more often than not these days.
But I don't think that, it's necessarily meeting criteria for intervention
I don't think so.
from time to time. But
But the other thing is that as time goes on, you learn how to navigate it more effectively, and you don't need, you know what I mean? Like it's a quicker turnaround. It's in the pivot. Um,
yeah.
an interesting comment just came up in the feed. I have to cultivate trust, something I do not have in myself at all.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, and I think
That's part of the disorder, right?
that's doubt, right?
Doubt.
It's the doubting disorder.
Right. Are you sure
Um,
you did that? Did you see it correctly?
yeah, yep. And one thing I just want to call out, and we'll be talking more about this is like in the third installation of this particular series as we do, is that the work is in cultivating trust, is in taking trusting actions, not in feeling that sense of trust or
Right.
security, or lack of doubt. So, or confidence, whatever way you want
Whatever.
to
Yeah.
look
Language.
at it. Yeah. Um,
Right. It's
so
built through behaviors, which is going to look like a leap of faith at the beginning of all this is like, okay, I'm jumping off a cliff and hopefully I land right on my
yeah.
feet and don't die.
Which, we say that tongue in cheek, but man, it's
Yeah.
so scary taking
It's
that jump.
terrifying. It's
Yeah.
terrifying.
Um,
Yeah.
everything in you. So, to all of you warriors out there who are in the midst of taking that leap, or who, have taken that leap, my hat is off to you.
Mhm. Absolutely. It's
Yeah.
it's not for the faint-hearted.
Nope. It is not. I'm aware that we're kind of running low on the time. So, one thing I wanted to announce, though, before we end for today,
Yes.
is that in 2 weeks' time, instead of meeting on Monday, we will be doing a Q&A with a screening of the movie Pure O, directed by Dylan Tucker, that premiered at South by Southwest last year. That is, unsurprisingly, about Pure O, or pure obsessional OCD.
Mhm.
So we'll be recording that Q&A. It's with the director, Dylan Tucker. It's with Kelley and myself, Elena Fasson, LCSW, who is also a wonderful therapist, works with kids. and with Chrissy Hodges of OCD Game Changers, who is a wonderful advocate and peer support specialist. So it should be a really great conversation, but we won't be live in 2 weeks. We'll be live again in 4. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Thank you for remembering.
Yeah, absolutely. And for anyone who's in the area, we hope you can join us. It's in Santa Monica at the Lemley. So
so look for our posts for more information.
Indeed. All
All
right.
right.
Adieu, everyone. See you next time.